The first bullet shattered the window before Callum Sterling's brain could process what his eyes were seeing. Glass became 1,000 crystalline daggers catching the dying October light. The sound came after a half-second delay that stretched into eternity. That primal crack of physics meeting violence. The kind of sound that rewrites a person's understanding of safety, of permanence, of the thin membrane separating the ordinary from the catastrophic. Callum didn't think. Thinking takes time, and time was measured in heartbeats, and heartbeats meant death. His body moved with an authority his conscious mind had never possessed. 12 feet separated his corner booth from the window seat where Adriana Valentino sat with her calculus homework spread before her, like tarot cards predicting a future she would never see. 12 feet, 4 strides, 3 seconds that would split his life into before and after. The barrel emerged from the passenger window of the gray Chevy Malibu like a serpent tasting air. Black metal, cold purpose. The MAC-10 submachine gun didn't care about intentions or innocence. It was mathematics and momentum, 30 rounds seeking flesh with mechanical indifference. Callum's worn sneakers found purchase on Danny's Diner's grease-slicked linoleum. His shoulder dropped like he was making a tackle he'd never been strong enough to make on any football field, in any universe where his life had afforded him the luxury of sports and Friday night lights and belonging to something larger than survival. He hit Adriana like a freight train with faulty brakes. She was beautiful in that untouchable way that made boys stupid and silent. Designer backpack worth more than Callum's entire wardrobe. Dark hair that fell like a curtain, shutting out a world she seemed determined to avoid despite being pretty enough to rule it. She'd been eating lunch alone for 3 weeks, ever since transferring to Riverside High, and Callum had noticed because noticing was what invisible people did. They cataloged, they observed, they knew the patterns of the visible world with the dedication of cartographers mapping territories they would never visit. When Callum's body collided with hers, Adriana's gray eyes went wide with confusion before terror had time to sharpen the emotion into something recognizable. Her chair clattered backward. His momentum carried them both down in a tangle of limbs and algebra, and teenage fear compressed into a moment so pure it felt like prayer. Callum twisted as they fell, instinct older than thought, deeper than training, making sure his back faced the window, making sure his body covered hers completely, making sure that if bullets came and bullets were coming, they would come through him first. The world exploded. Tat, 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 tat. 30 rounds in 3 seconds. The MAC-10 spoke in a language older than civilization, the grammar of violence that needed no translation. Glass became razor rain. Wood paneling became shrapnel. The smell of gunpowder mixed with fryer grease and teenage terror, a cologne that would haunt Danny's Diner long after the cleanup crew scrubbed away the blood. Callum felt something hot punch through his left shoulder blade. Not pain, not yet, just awareness. Pressure. The sensation of his body being violated by physics traveling faster than sound. Then another burning kiss lower on his right side just above his belt line. His back became fire. His lungs couldn't find air. And beneath him, warm and alive and trembling like a trapped bird, Adriana was screaming. But she was screaming, which meant she was breathing, which meant she was alive, which meant he'd done it right. Callum's vision began to tunnel. Darkness crept in from the edges like ink spreading through water. The last thing he saw before the black took him was Adriana's face hovering above his own, those gray eyes wide with terror, and something else, something that looked almost like recognition. Her lips formed words he couldn't hear over the ringing in his ears, over the car alarm triggered by stray bullets, over the chaos of Danny's Diner transformed from sanctuary to crime scene. What Callum couldn't know as consciousness slipped away and his blood pooled on checkered linoleum was that those words were "Dad's gonna kill them." What Callum couldn't know was that Dad was Dominic Valentino, vice president of the Phantom Kings Motorcycle Club, enforcer of club justice, collector of debts, both monetary and blood. What Callum couldn't know was that he'd just saved the one person in the city whose life was worth more than money. He'd just earned a debt that would be paid in iron and loyalty. and the Phantom Kings always paid their debts. 3 weeks earlier, Callum Sterling had perfected the art of being invisible. It was a survival skill really honed through years of navigating a world that had no use for poor kids with secondhand clothes and empty stomachs. When you're the scholarship student at Riverside High, the one whose sneakers have more duct tape than rubber, whose jeans come from the thrift store with someone else's faded memories still clinging to the denim, you learn to occupy space without taking up space. You learn to eat lunch in bathroom stalls when the cafeteria feels like a coliseum designed specifically for your humiliation. You learn which hallways to avoid during passing period, which corners the predators claim as hunting grounds. You learn that eye contact with guys like Garrett Pemberton and his football cronies is an invitation for consequences, ranging from locker room beatings to swirlies to worse things that don't leave visible marks, but carve themselves into your psyche like graffiti on bathroom walls. So Callum had become a ghost, a shadow, the boy who sat in the back of every class, who never raised his hand even when he knew the answer, and he always knew the answer because knowledge was free and grades were the only currency that might buy him a ticket out of this life. He could slip through crowds like smoke, could make himself so small and unremarkable that teachers sometimes marked him absent even when he sat 3 feet away. The apartment Callum shared with his grandmother Margaret was a one-bedroom walk-up in the part of town where sirens sang lullabies and chain-link fences wore barbed wire crowns. The building's brick facade was crumbling like stale bread windows barred against an invasion that had already happened decades ago when hope moved out and desperation moved in. Maggie Sterling was 70 years old and looked 80. 4 decades working factory floors had ground her body down like metal on stone, leaving her with arthritis that turned simple tasks into negotiations with pain and a cough that rattled in her chest like dice in a cup. The medical bills piled up on the kitchen table like accusations, past due notices in red ink, threats disguised as reminders. The mathematics of American poverty laid bare in 12-point font. Callum slept on the couch. Maggie took the bedroom, though most nights Callum could hear her coughing through the thin walls, could hear her rosary beads clicking as she prayed to a God who seemed perpetually busy with other people's problems. She'd raised him alone after his father died before Callum was born, some accident involving construction work and insufficient safety protocols, and lawyers who explained that wrongful death settlements don't go far when you are undocumented. His mother had followed 6 months later. Overdosed, though Maggie never said the word. Just, she couldn't handle the pain, mijo. Sometimes the world breaks people. So it had been Callum and Maggie against the world for 16 years. Her Social Security check barely covered rent. Callum worked where he could under the table jobs that paid cash and asked no questions. Dishwashing, yard work, anything that didn't interfere with school, because Maggie was fierce about education with the fervor of someone who'd never had the opportunity herself. Home was the place where heat got shut off every winter and eviction notices accumulated like snow. Home was where Callum lay awake at night, listening to his grandmother's wet cough and doing mental calculus about whether her medication or their rent was more important this month. Home was a question with no good answer. So Danny's Diner was better. The diner sat on the corner of Riverside and 12th, a chrome and neon monument to American optimism circa 1953. The building had outlived that optimism by several decades, but Joe Moretti kept it running through sheer stubbornness and an unwillingness to admit that the world had moved on. Red vinyl booths with duct-taped wounds, linoleum floors that had forgotten their original color, a jukebox in the corner that played songs from when America still believed in itself. Callum's booth was in the back corner nearest the emergency exit. The vinyl was ripped there, yellow foam guts spilling out like a wound that wouldn't heal. Nobody else wanted that booth, which made it perfect. Every day after school, Callum would scrape together $2.47, exact change for the smallest order of fries and a water cup he'd fill with Sprite when Joe wasn't looking. He'd make those fries last an hour doing homework by the greasy light of the neon open sign, pretending he had somewhere better to be. He didn't. Danny's was warm. Danny's had lights that worked. Danny smelled like burnt coffee and possibility, and Joe Moretti never made him feel like a charity case, even though they both knew that's exactly what he was. Joe was 60-something, built like a retired boxer with hands scarred from decades of grill work. He'd inherited the diner from his father, who'd inherited it from his father back when this neighborhood was working class instead of no class, back when having a business on Riverside meant something other than having a front row seat to urban decay. Kid but Joe would say, sliding an extra handful of fries onto Callum's plate when the after-school rush died down. You gonna order something with protein someday, or you planning to subsist on potatoes and stolen soda? Callum would smile grateful and embarrassed in equal measure. 247 is what I got, Mr. Moretti. Joe would grunt, wipe down the counter with a rag that had seen better decades and say nothing. But the fries would keep coming. Small mercies in a world short on mercy. It was a Tuesday when everything changed. October 15th, the kind of fall day where the sun sets too early and the world feels like it's holding its breath, waiting for winter to make good on its threats. The after-school crowd at Danny's was typical chaos. Sophomore girls giggling over phones that cost more than Callum's monthly food budget. Freshman boys having a ketchup packet war until Joe threatened to throw them out. The eternal smell of beef grease and fryer oil, the soundtrack of classic rock bleeding from speakers that crackled with age. Callum was working through calculus homework, the numbers arranging themselves into patterns that made more sense than anything else in his life. Mathematics didn't care if you were poor. Equations didn't judge. There was something pure about a problem that had a definitive answer, unlike everything else that required navigation and compromise, and the kind of social capital Callum would never possess. That's when he first saw her. Adriana Valentino materialized in Danny's diner like a vision from a different tax bracket. She wore black jeans that fit like they'd been tailored, a gray sweater that probably cost what Callum spent on food in 3 months, and an expression that said, "Don't even think about talking to me," in a language that transcended verbal communication. Her backpack was real leather, with silver hardware that caught the light. She was beautiful in a way that made Callum's 16-year-old brain short-circuit, sharp cheekbones, dark hair pulled back in a way that looked effortless, but probably wasn't. Gray eyes that held a sadness matching his own, though her sadness probably came from different zip codes. She took the booth by the window, 3 tables away from Callum's corner. She ordered a Cobb salad that cost $9.95, which Callum knew because he'd memorized the menu during the hours he spent here. She barely touched it, just picked at the lettuce while staring at her laptop screen with the intensity of someone trying to solve a problem that had no solution. Callum tried not to stare, he really did. But there was something about her that made his carefully cultivated invisibility training fail. Maybe it was the way she chewed her bottom lip when she was concentrating. Maybe it was the sadness living in her eyes, the kind that recognized its reflection in others. Maybe it was just that she was beautiful in a way that made him forget to breathe. The guys at school had tried, of course. Garrett Pemberton had swaggered up to her locker that first week with his Letterman jacket and his teeth-whitening strip smile and his assumption that the world would arrange itself according to his preferences. She'd look through him like he was glass. After that, she ate alone. Which was weird because girls who looked like Adriana Valentino didn't eat alone. They held court at the popular tables surrounded by admirers and imitators, their social currency so vast they could afford to spend it carelessly. But Adriana seemed to prefer her own company, always with a book or homework, always with earbuds and music creating a moat between herself and the world, always projecting an aura of leave me alone that most people respected out of confusion rather than consideration. Callum understood it, understood her. Even what he didn't understand was why she'd started coming to Danny's diner. This place was for kids like him, kids who couldn't afford the trendy coffee shop downtown where a latte cost $7 and came with a side of social validation. Kids who couldn't drop $20 at the organic smoothie place by the mall where being seen mattered more than the overpriced wheatgrass concoctions. Danny's was for the invisible kids, the marginal kids, the kids whose presence in the world felt conditional and temporary. Yet here she was, every day for the past week. Same booth by the window, same Cobb salad she barely touched, same calculus homework she definitely didn't need help with based on the test scores that got posted on the board in their shared class. Callum had noticed her at school first. Hard not to notice when someone that striking arrived in the middle of the semester like a comet disrupting orbital patterns. She'd transferred in 3 weeks ago from somewhere else, somewhere private, probably downgrading to Riverside High's overcrowded hallways and outdated textbooks. The rumors had been immediate and wild. Witness protection, scandal at the old school, parents' divorce forcing a move. Nobody knew the truth. Adriana Valentino wasn't talking. And now she was here in Callum's sanctuary, occupying space with the kind of casual confidence that came from never having to question whether you belonged. Her presence disrupted the equilibrium, made Callum hyper-aware of his own shabby appearance, his ratty jacket, his homework done on paper he'd fished from the recycling bin, because new notebooks cost money he didn't have. He tried to focus on a calculus, derivatives and integrals problems that solved themselves if you just followed the rules. But his eyes kept drifting to her booth, watching the way afternoon light caught in her dark hair, watching her fingers drum against the table in patterns that suggested music he couldn't hear, watching her exist in her own orbit, separate and untouchable. She never looked at him. Why would she? Callum Sterling was furniture. Background. The kind of person you could sit 3 feet from for a week and never actually see. That's what Callum told himself. That's what he believed. Until the gray Chevy Malibu appeared. It was 4:47 p.m. when Callum first noticed the car. Only caught it in his peripheral vision, a beat-up sedan with tinted windows crawling past Danny's front window at a speed that felt wrong, too slow, too deliberate, like it was looking for something. Callum had developed instincts the way some kids develop jump shots or guitar skills. Growing up where you learn to read threat the way meteorologists read clouds, pattern recognition as survival mechanism. At 12 years old, Callum had been walking home from the library when a car just like this one had rolled through his neighborhood. Same slow crawl, same tinted windows, same feeling of wrongness that made his stomach clench. The gunshots had started 10 seconds later. Drive-by shooting, the news called it. Gang retaliation. Callum had hit the ground behind a parked car, watching as bullets tore through the house where the Rodriguez family lived. Miguel Rodriguez, 17, died on his front lawn trying to protect his little sister. Callum had known Miguel. Not well, but enough to say hello in passing, enough to recognize his face in the school hallways. After that, Callum learned to pay attention to cars that moved wrong. The gray Malibu had a dent in the rear quarter panel driver's side. Tinted windows dark enough to be illegal. It cruised past Danny's front windows like a shark circling, and Callum felt that old familiar tightening in his chest. The one that said danger, said wrong, said pay attention because something bad is coming, and you have exactly now to decide whether you're going to be a witness or a victim. The car disappeared around the corner. Callum tried to return to his homework, but the numbers wouldn't stay still. His hand found his water cup, took a sip of stolen Sprite that suddenly tasted like copper and fear. 4:52 p.m. The Malibu came back. This time Callum saw the driver. Black baseball cap pulled low. Sunglasses despite the fact that the sun was nearly down the October sky, bleeding orange and purple like a bruise forming. The car slowed even more, crawling past Danny's at walking speed. Callum's heart started hammering. Ancient instincts screaming in a language older than words. Wrong, something's wrong, get ready, move. But move where? Do what? He was probably being paranoid. Probably reading threat into coincidence. Probably letting childhood trauma color his perception of a world that was dangerous but not actively hunting him in this specific moment. Except Callum trusted his instincts the way sailors trusted storms. You didn't question the wind, you adjusted your sails. He glanced at Adriana. She was bent over her calculus textbook, completely absorbed. pencil moving across paper in elegant loops, dark hair falling across her face like a curtain shutting out the world and its dangers. Headphones in, oblivious. Around them, Danny's diner continued its usual chaos. Melissa Park and her friends were taking selfies in their booth, practicing angles and filters with the seriousness of archaeologists documenting ruins. Kevin Tran and his crew were having an increasingly aggressive debate about which superhero would win in a fight, their voices rising with teenage certainty about things that didn't matter. Joe Moretti was behind the counter flipping burgers with the muscle memory of 50 years radio, playing classic rock that couldn't quite drown out the ambient noise of after-school adolescence. Normal, safe, ordinary. But that car was wrong. 4:58 p.m. The Malibu returned. This time it didn't pass. It stopped. Right in front of Adriana's window booth. Callum stood up without meaning to. His chair scraped against linoleum with a sound like a record scratch, sharp enough that a few people glanced his way. The invisible boy suddenly visible, but their attention immediately slid away. Background noise. Not important. Nothing to see here. The Malibu's passenger window began to roll down. Mechanical whir that Callum could somehow hear over the diner's din, like his ears had suddenly gained superpowers, like the universe was putting everything in slow motion so he could see exactly what was about to happen. A hand emerged from the darkness inside the car. The hand held a gun, not a pistol. Callum had seen those before in movies and music videos, and once in real life when a dealer got sloppy 3 blocks from his apartment. This was something else, something bigger, something designed not for precision, but for volume. The barrel was stubby and mean perforated metal wrapped around potential energy waiting to become kinetic. A MAC-10 submachine gun, though, Callum didn't know the name. Didn't need to. He understood what it was the way prey understands predators. This was death. This was mathematics. This was 30 rounds seeking flesh at 1,100 feet per second. The barrel swung toward Adriana's booth like a compass finding north, and Callum's body moved. He didn't decide to move. Decision implies choice, implies thought, implies the luxury of weighing options and consequences. Callum didn't have any of those things. He just had instinct and adrenaline and a sudden crystalline certainty that if he didn't move right now, that beautiful, sad girl by the window was going to die. Get down. The words tore from his throat as his legs pumped. 12 feet, the distance between his corner booth and Adriana's window seat. The distance between life and death measured in heartbeats and shoe leather and desperation. 9 feet. Adriana looked up confused. Her gray eyes found his face. She didn't understand. How could she? She'd probably never heard a gunshot outside of movies, probably never had to calculate the trajectory between muzzle and body, probably never spent nights lying awake wondering if the next siren was coming for someone she knew. 6 feet. The gun's barrel finished its arc. Callum could see the black hole of the muzzle now, could see death itself yawning open, patient and indifferent. 3 feet. Adriana's eyes went wide. She'd seen it. Seen the gun. Her mouth opened to scream, but sound hadn't found her vocal cords yet. Shock stealing her voice the way it stole everything else. 0. Callum hit her like a linebacker, like the athlete he'd never been, could never be, except for this one perfect moment when adrenaline and desperation transformed his scrawny frame into something capable of miracle. His shoulder caught her in the chest, not hard enough to hurt, but hard enough to move. His arms wrapped around her waist. His momentum carried them both backward and down as her chair toppled, and they crashed to the floor in a tangle of limbs and terror and physics. Callum twisted as they fell, instinct again, making sure his back was to the window, making sure his body covered hers, making sure that if bullets came, the bullets came. The MAC-10 spoke in its native tongue, tat, 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 tat. 30 rounds in under 3 seconds because the MAC-10 cycled at 1,100 rounds per minute when you held the trigger down, when you wanted to paint a space with violence, when you didn't care about precision, because volume would do the job. The window exploded inward. Glass transformed into 1,000 pieces of crystalline shrapnel, each one a tiny knife-seeking flesh. Callum felt them pepper his back like angry hornets. Wood paneling from the booth splintered centuries-old timber, becoming shrapnel. Vinyl seats erupted in puffs of yellow foam. The smell of gunpowder flooded the space, acrid and chemical, mixing with burger grease and teenage fear. Someone was screaming. Multiple someones. High-pitched terror that registered in Callum's hindbrain, but couldn't penetrate the focused calm that had descended over him. He couldn't tell if one of those screams was his own. Pain blossomed across his back like flowers made of fire. One bloomed below his left shoulder blade. The first bullet, 9 millimeter round, tumbling through muscle and tissue, missing his lung by inches, punching through his back and exiting somewhere near his collarbone. The pain was immense and distant, like it was happening to someone else. Like his nervous system couldn't quite process the enormity of violation fast enough to make it real. Another bloom lowered just above his belt line on the right side. The second bullet, this one caught bone, ricocheted off his rib, tumbled through meat, and came out somewhere near his abdomen. The shock of impact drove the air from his lungs. A dozen smaller blooms where glass found flesh. Shrapnel from a war he'd never enlisted in, never wanted, never asked for, but got anyway because that's how the world worked for kids like him. But beneath him, warm and alive and trembling like a bird caught in human hands, Adriana Valentino was untouched. The gunfire stopped. Silence rushed in to fill the void, broken only by car alarms triggered by stray bullets, by distant screams, by the wet, labored sound of Callum's breathing. His lungs weren't working right. Each breath was agony air moving through damaged tissue, blood-filling spaces meant for oxygen. He tried to push himself up, tried to check if Adriana was okay, but his arms weren't responding correctly. Everything felt distant and cottony and wrong, like he was underwater, like gravity had tripled. "Don't move," Adriana's voice small and sharp, scared in a way that cut through the fog. "Oh God, don't move. There's so much blood." Blood. His blood. Callum could feel it now, warm and sticky, soaking through his thrift store t-shirt, pooling beneath them both on Danny's checkered linoleum. His blood coming from holes in his back, from violations of flesh that should have killed him, would probably still kill him if the math worked out the way physics suggested. Am I lying? Getting shot hurt a lot more than movies made it seem. "You okay?" "I'm okay." Her voice cracked. Tears. She was crying now. "You're shot. You're fucking shot. Why did you don't even know me?" Callum tried to smile. It probably looked more like a grimace, like a death mask being fitted in real time. Seemed like the thing to do. Somewhere far away, sirens began to wail. Police. Ambulance. The official response to unofficial violence. Coming to catalog the damage, to add another data point to the city's statistics on gun violence, to file reports that would be read by people who'd never set foot in this neighborhood. But closer, much closer, Callum heard something else. Motorcycle engines. Lots of them. The roar of V-twin motors, that distinctive Harley-Davidson thunder that made windows rattle and bones vibrate, coming from multiple directions, converging on this shitty diner in this shitty part of town like a swarm of mechanical hornets answering a call to arms. Adriana heard them too. Her tears stopped, like someone had flipped a switch. She fumbled for her phone with shaking, blood-slicked hands, punched a speed dial number, held it to her ear. Code red. Her voice was suddenly cold, controlled. Despite the tears still on her cheeks, despite the blood painting, her hands enclosed despite everything. "Danny's Diner on Riverside. They found me." A pause. Callum could hear a man's voice on the other end. Deep, angry, scared. A father's voice. "I'm okay." Adriana looked down at Callum. "But the boy who saved me, Dad, he's dying." Callum tried to ask her what she meant, but the darkness was closing in fast now. The gray edges of his vision creeping toward the center like curtains being drawn. His body was shutting down, prioritizing functions, deciding that consciousness was a luxury it could no longer afford. The last thing he saw was Adriana's face hovering above him like a moon, beautiful and terrible and afraid, her gray eyes wide with an emotion he couldn't name. The last thing he heard was the thunder of motorcycles growing louder and louder, shaking Danny's broken windows, rattling what was left of the glass, vibrating through the floor and into his bones like the drums of an approaching army. The last thing he felt was Adriana's hand gripping his, holding on like he was the only solid thing in a world gone mad. Her fingers laced through his slick with his blood, warm with her life connecting them in a way that transcended the violence that brought them together. Then the darkness swallowed him whole. Callum Sterling, 16 years old, invisible boy, ghost in the machine, fell into unconsciousness on the blood-soaked floor of Danny's diner, while motorcycle engines shook the world and a girl he barely knew wept over his broken body. He'd done the right thing, the brave thing, the impossible thing. Now he just had to survive it. Beep, beep, beep. The sound pulled Callum back from wherever he'd been, someplace dark and quiet and weirdly peaceful, like floating in warm water where nothing could hurt you, and time didn't exist and the world's demands couldn't reach. The beeping was annoying, insistent, like an alarm clock he couldn't shut off, dragging him back to a reality he wasn't sure he wanted to face. He tried to move his arm to swat at the noise, and that's when the pain introduced itself. Holy Mother of God. His entire back was on fire, flames licking up his spine across his shoulder blades, wrapping around his ribs like hands trying to crush him from the inside out. Every breath felt like someone was stabbing him with hot knives. His mouth tasted like copper and cotton balls, like he'd been chewing on pennies while passed out in a laundromat. Callum's eyes snapped open, white ceiling, fluorescent lights humming with that particular frequency that made your teeth ache, the smell of disinfectant and floor wax, and something underneath that was distinctly hospital, that combination of sickness and industrial cleaning products and the ghost of suffering that no amount of bleach could erase. A machine beside him making that goddamn beeping noise. IV line in his left arm tube snaking up to a bag of clear fluid. Hospital. Memory came flooding back like water through a broken dam. The gun. The window. Adriana's gray eyes wide with terror. The impact of bullets punching through his back. The blood. The screaming. The motorcycle engines growing louder and louder until they shook the world. Easy there, kid. Don't try to sit up. Callum's head whipped toward the voice, and even that small movement sent agony shooting down his spine like electricity finding ground. Sitting in a chair beside his bed was a man who looked like he'd been carved from a mountain and then tattooed by an artist with strong opinions about flames and Nordic symbolism. He was massive, 6'5" at least, with shoulders that could probably support a car if the jack failed. His head was shaved completely bald, the scalp covered in elaborate flame tattoos that licked up from his neck and across his skull like he was perpetually on fire. Gray beard thick and well-maintained, the kind that made you look distinguished if you wore it right, and this man definitely wore it right. Arms like tree trunks covered in ink that told stories Callum couldn't read but could sense. Prison tattoos mixed with professional work. Dates and names and symbols that meant something in a world Callum had only glimpsed from a distance. The man wore a leather vest, a cut Callum's brain supplied from somewhere from movies or shows or cultural osmosis. Black leather with patches and pins arranged in a hierarchy that communicated rank and history and belonging. On the back, visible when the man shifted, was a large patch, a skull wearing a crown, flames for wings. Beneath it, a rocker that said Phantom Kings MC in letters that looked like they'd been stitched with chrome thread. Motorcycle Club. This man was in a motorcycle club, and he was sitting beside Callum's hospital bed like it was the most natural thing in the world. Who? Callum's voice came out as a croak. His throat felt like sandpaper. The man reached for a plastic cup with a straw, held it to Callum's lips. Drink, Small sips. Callum obeyed, too confused and hurting to argue. The water was the best thing he'd ever tasted. Better than stolen Sprite, better than anything. Cold and clean and real. Better, the man asked. Callum nodded, then regretted it as pain spiked through his neck. Where's Adriana? Did she? She's fine. The man's expression softened slightly, like rock warming in sunlight. Not a scratch on her. Thanks to you. Relief flooded through Callum so intense it almost blotted out the pain. She was okay. He'd done it. She was alive. Who are you? Callum managed. The man settled back in his chair, which creaked under his weight. Name's Ox. I'm a brother in the Phantom Kings. Been sitting here making sure nobody bothers you while you sleep off the worst of it. How long was I? 14 hours. You coded once in the ambulance, but the docs got you back. Ox's expression was serious. 2 bullets, one collapsed your lung, the other just missed your spine by about half an inch. He paused. You got lucky, kid. Callum didn't feel lucky. He felt like he'd been hit by a truck, then backed over for good measure, then maybe run over again, just to make sure. My grandmother, he said suddenly, panic rising. Maggie, she'll be worried. She can't afford. Already taken care of, Ox interrupted. She's been here twice. Nice lady. Doesn't speak much English, but she hugs hard. He smiled slightly. Club made sure she got home safe both times. Also paid for a nurse to check in on her daily while you're laid up. Callum stared. What? Hospital bills too. All of it covered. I can't. Callum's brain was trying to process this and failing. I don't have insurance. I can't pay you back. I can't. You're not paying back shit, Ox said, and his tone broke no argument. You took bullets meant for someone precious to this club. Far as we're concerned, you're owed not owing. Callum's head was spinning, and not just from the painkillers. I don't understand. Ox leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his expression serious. That girl you saved, Adriana, that's Dominic Valentino's daughter. Dominic's our VP, vice president. She's club royalty, which means the bullets you took were meant to hurt this brotherhood. I didn't know, Callum whispered. I just saw the gun, and we know you didn't know. That's what makes it matter. Ox stood up, and Callum realized the man was even bigger than he'd thought. Easily 250 pounds of muscle and scars, and the kind of presence that made you instinctively step back. You didn't do it for reward or recognition. You did it because it was right. That's rare, kid. That's valuable. Before Callum could respond, the hospital room door opened, and Dominic Valentino walked in. Callum had thought Ox was intimidating, but Dominic was something else entirely. He radiated danger the way the sun radiated heat. Constant, inescapable, potentially lethal if you got too close or stayed too long. He was 6'3", maybe 240, all of it muscle and scar tissue and the accumulated mass of a man who'd spent his life making sure he was always the biggest, strongest, most dangerous person in any room. His head was shaved like Ox's, covered in flame tattoos that matched some kind of brotherhood marker. Gray beard that was more salt than pepper, these days trimmed close. His face looked like it had been broken and rebuilt several times. Nose that had clearly lost multiple fights. Scar running from his left eyebrow all the way to his jawline, like someone had tried to cut his face in half and given up halfway through. But his eyes were what held Callum frozen. Dark, intelligent, currently examining Callum with an intensity that made him feel like an insect under a microscope, like every secret he'd ever kept was being cataloged and assessed and filed away for future reference. Dominic wore his cut over a black t-shirt. The leather vest was covered in patches more than Ox's telling stories in a language Callum didn't speak. On his left hand, he wore a wedding ring. On his right, a different ring that looked military. His massive arms were covered in tattoos ink, telling the story of a life lived hard and violent and according to rules most people wouldn't understand. This him, Dominic's voice was gravel in a cement mixer. Yeah, Rock. This is Callum Sterling. Dominic approached the bed slowly, deliberately, like he was giving Callum time to process his presence to prepare for whatever came next. He pulled up a second chair, normal size looked comically small under him, and sat down with his elbows on his knees, mirroring Ox's earlier posture. For a long moment, he just looked at Callum, studied him, assessed him. Callum fought the urge to squirm. Finally, Dominic spoke. You know who I am. Adriana's father, Callum, said, his voice steadier than he felt. In Vapai of the Phantom Kings. That's right. Dominic's expression didn't change. You know what you did yesterday? I tried to help. You threw yourself on top of my daughter when bullets were coming through that window. You took 2 rounds in the back. You could have died. Dominic's jaw tightened. You should have died. Doctor said if that second bullet had been half an inch to the right, it would have severed your spine. You'd be paralyzed. Callum swallowed hard. Is Adriana really okay? And that's when Dominic's expression cracked. Not much, just a slight softening around the eyes, a barely perceptible relaxation in his shoulders. But it was there. She's perfect, not a scratch. You made sure of that. Dominic reached out slowly, telegraphing the movement like he was approaching a skittish animal, and gripped Callum's forearm. His hand was rough, callous, scarred, the hand of a man who'd lived hard and fought harder. You gave me the greatest gift anyone's ever given me. You gave me my daughter's life. Callum didn't know what to say to that. What could you say? I didn't really think about it, he admitted. I just moved. I know. That's what makes it honorable. Dominic released Callum's arm and sat back. Most people freeze when bullets start flying. Natural human response. But you ran toward the danger to save a girl you didn't even know. I know her, Callum said softly. I mean, I don't know her, but I've seen her at school. She seems... He trailed off, unsure how to finish that sentence. Nice, sad, beautiful. All of those felt inadequate. Lonely, Dominic finished for him. Yeah, she is. Being my daughter comes with a price. Hard to make friends when your dad's in an MC and your life's potentially in danger. Dominic stood up, and Callum noticed for the first time that there were other people in the hallway outside his room. Men in cuts standing guard. I need to ask you something important, and I need you to be honest with me. Can you do that? Callum nodded, even though moving his head sent pain shooting down his neck. The guys who did this, the Vipers, they're our enemies. They've been testing us, pushing boundaries. This shooting that was an escalation, an act of war. Dominic's expression hardened. We're going to respond. That's not a question. But before we do, I need to know, do you remember anything about the shooter, the car, anything that might help us? Callum closed his eyes, trying to pull details from the chaos of memory. Gray Chevy Malibu, older model, dent in the rear quarter panel driver's side, tinted windows. I didn't see the shooter's face, just his arm and the gun. When he opened his eyes, Dominic was smiling. It wasn't a nice smile. That's more than enough. We already found the car dumped 3 blocks away, wiped clean. But now we know what we're looking for. He nodded to Ox. Send that to Wraith. Tell him to check traffic cams in a 5-block radius. That dent's distinctive. Ox pulled out his phone and stepped into the hallway. Dominic turned back to Callum. You need anything. Food books. Someone to threaten the nurses into giving you better pain meds. Despite everything, Callum almost smiled. I'm okay. Bullshit. You're a 16-year-old kid recovering from gunshot wounds. You're not okay. But you will be. Dominic headed for the door, then paused. Your grandmother, Margaret Wright. Maggie, yeah. She's a good woman, worried sick about you. We're making sure she's taken care of while you're in here. He turned back and his expression was serious. And when you get out, we're going to talk about the future, about options. Options? You saved my daughter. That debt doesn't get paid in cash or handshakes. It gets paid in family. Dominic's gaze was intense. The Phantom Kings take care of our own. And whether you knew it or not, the second you threw yourself on those bullets, you became ours. With that cryptic statement, he left his boots heavy on the linoleum floor. Callum lay there, his mind reeling. Family. What did that even mean? He didn't have long to wonder. 5 minutes later, the door opened again, and Adriana walked in. She looked different from the untouchable girl at school. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her face was scrubbed clean of makeup, and she wore an oversized hoodie that was probably borrowed from someone in the club. She looked younger, more vulnerable, more real. Hi, she said softly, hovering by the door like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to come closer. Hi, Callum echoed. His heart was doing weird things in his chest, and he didn't think that was related to the collapsed lung. I wanted to come sooner, but Dad said I should wait until you were awake. She trailed off, worrying at her bottom lip in that way he'd noticed at the diner. Can I sit? Yeah, of course. She pulled the chair Dominic had vacated closer to the bed and sat down, her hands clasped in her lap. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Adriana said, "Thank you." Callum shook his head gently, mindful of the pain. You don't have to thank me. Yes, I do. You saved my life. You almost died saving my life. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Why did you do it? You don't even know me. I wanted to know you, Callum admitted before his brain could stop his mouth. I mean, not like in a creepy way, just you seemed interesting and sad, and I thought maybe we could be friends. A tear slipped down Adriana's cheek. Well, we're definitely more than friends now. You can't take bullets for someone and stay at the friend level. What level are we at, then? Adriana laughed, a wet, slightly hysterical sound. I don't know. Bonded for life, you're stuck with me forever. She wiped at her eyes. Dad's already decided your family, which fair warning means you're probably going to have bikers following you around for the foreseeable future. They're very protective. I noticed, Callum said dryly, thinking of the guards in the hallway. I'm sorry, Adriana said suddenly. I'm sorry you got hurt because of me. I'm sorry my life is so complicated that people shoot at me. I'm sorry. Stop. Callum reached out with his good arm, the one without the IV, and took her hand. Her skin was soft, warm, alive. You didn't ask for those guys to shoot at you. You didn't put that gun in their hands. This isn't your fault. Adriana squeezed his hand hard, like she was trying to anchor herself to something real. You're too nice. You know that, way too nice for this world. Someone's gotta be. They sat like that for a while, hand in hand, not speaking. Outside the window, Callum could see the sun setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Another day survived. Another day closer to whatever came next. 3 more days crawled by. Recovery was measured in small victories. Sitting up without screaming. Taking 3 steps to the bathroom. Breathing without feeling like his lung was full of broken glass. Maggie visited every morning, Adriana every afternoon. The rotating guard of Phantom King's members became as familiar as the nurses. On day 4, Dr. Patel gave him discharge papers. You're healing well, but 6 weeks physical therapy, no heavy lifting for 3 months, and you'll scar. That's okay, Callum said. Ox drove him home in his massive truck, 3 bikes forming escort. Maggie was waiting on the stoop. She pulled him into a hug that hurt and felt like heaven at the same time. Inside the apartment, she'd made his favorite meal. As they ate, she studied him with fierce eyes. These men, she said carefully, they are dangerous. Sometimes, Callum agreed, when they need to be. She was quiet, then, they protected you, protected me, made sure we could eat pay bills. Her hand found his. Your mother would not like them, but she is not here, and you are alive because you have a good heart. That Monday, Callum returned to school. At 7:15 a.m., Ox and Wraith knocked on his door, both in full cuts. We're your ride, Ox announced. 30 minutes later, Callum walked through Riverside High's gates, flanked by 2 massive bikers. The quad fell silent. Every head turned. Garrett Pemberton went pale. After the bikers left, Kevin Tran approached cautiously. Are you in a gang now? No, Callum said. I'm just friends with people who ride motorcycles. Adriana appeared at his locker, genuine smile transforming her face. You came. Had to. Homework won't do itself. Walk me to class. At lunch, Adriana was waiting at a center table, dead center where everyone could see. She'd saved him a seat. Callum sat down. The cafeteria erupted in whispers. Ignore them, Adriana said, stealing a fry. Mid-lunch, Garrett approached, nervous, might throw up. Can I talk to you, he asked, privately. In an empty corner, Garrett wouldn't meet his eyes. My dad told me what you did. Saving her. That's badass. He swallowed. And he also told me her dad is someone I don't want to piss off, so I'm sorry for being a dick. The locker stuff, all of it. It wasn't a great apology, fear-motivated, but it was something. Okay, Callum said. Just leave me alone from now on. Relief flooded Garrett's face. Deal. 2 weeks after hospital discharge, Callum received a text from Dominic. Clubhouse tonight. Family dinner. You better be there. The Phantom King's clubhouse sat on 5 acres converted warehouse surrounded by bikes and brotherhood. As Ox's truck pulled through the gates, Callum saw the full club assembled. The smell of grilling meat mixed with motorcycle exhaust. Kids ran through the yard. Music played loud enough to feel in your chest. After everyone ate, Hawk stood, the club president, silver-haired and commanding. Callum Sterling, Hawk said. Come here. Callum approached Adriana, squeezing his hand before letting go. Hawk held out a wooden box carved with the Phantom King's logo. Open it. Inside was a leather vest, black leather, simple design. On the back, embroidered in silver, friend of the club. It's not a patch, Hawk explained, but it's recognition. Means you're under our protection. Means you've earned respect. Means you're family. Callum lifted the vest, feeling its weight. Say you'll wear it with pride, Dominic added. Yes, Callum said. Thank you. He slipped it on. Perfect fit. The club erupted in cheers. Later, Dominic pulled Callum aside to the property's edge. When Adriana was born, I promised her mother I'd keep our daughter safe, no matter what. Dominic's voice was rough. For 16 years, I've kept that promise. Then you showed up. This kid throwing himself on bullets without hesitation. He pulled out a challenge coin, Phantom King's logo embossed in metal. This is my personal coin. Only a handful exist. You ever need anything, show this. Any king will help. No questions. Callum took it warm and heavy. Thank you. Having this coin ties you to us, to our world. Things might get complicated. Things are already complicated. Dominic laughed. Fair point. He paused. You're young, still figuring out who you are, but I see potential, honor. When you turn 18, prospect position is open. Your choice, no pressure. As they walked back, Dominic put his arm around Callum's shoulders. Welcome to the family, son. And for the first time in 16 years, Callum Sterling knew exactly where he belonged. 5 weeks after moving into the apartment above the Phantom King's clubhouse, Callum's life had found a new rhythm. School during the day, physical therapy 3 times a week, part-time work at Valentino Security, learning the legitimate side of the business. $15 an hour cash. Maggie had transformed. The clubhouse women, Catherine Maria, the old ladies who'd seen everything, had adopted her. She baked cookies for prospects, scolded full patches about language. And for the first time in years, her cough was gone. Specialist Dominic had paid for. Medication that actually worked. Callum and Adriana were officially dating. Dominic had rules. No closed doors. Curfew at 10. Respect. It was a Saturday in early December when Callum was helping Oxgap spark plugs in the garage. The club was having a family dinner. Full membership, old ladies' kids running around despite the cold. That's when Callum saw them. 4 men coming over the east fence line, moving low and fast. One carried something long, a shotgun. Callum's blood turned to ice. Ox guns, fence line. His voice cut through music and laughter like a blade. Ox's head snapped up. His hand went to his hip, came up with a Glock. Contact east side. The transformation was instant. Women grabbed children, moved inside to a safe room. Men drew weapons concealed on hips, in boots under cuts. Legal carry on private property. Hawk appeared barking orders. Defensive positions, do not fire first. The four Vipers found themselves exposed, facing 20 armed Phantom Kings. Bad position, desperation. The man with the shotgun was the lieutenant from the original hit. Wild-eyed, breathing hard. "You want the kid?" he shouted. "Hand him over and we leave." Dominic stepped forward, unarmed but deadly. "You're on private property. Outgunned. Leave now. We call cops. Stay, you die. We came for the kid who killed our brothers." Those men killed themselves, pointing guns at my daughter. Dominic's voice could etch steel. "You want Callum. You go through me." Before Callum's brain caught up, he stepped out from behind the bikes. "Stop," his voice steadier than he felt. "I'm here. You want me. Take me. Leave them alone." "Callum, no!" Adriana screamed from the doorway. Dominic turned, rage and pride warring. "Get back in cover, kid." "But now!" The lieutenant raised his shotgun. Shaking hands, sirens, distant but approaching. Multiple units. The lieutenant's eyes went wide. "You called the cops." "5 minutes ago," Wraith confirmed, phone in hand. Anonymous tip about armed intruders. The lieutenant swung the shotgun toward Dominic. The shot was thunderous. But it didn't come from the Viper. Wraith, positioned on the roof, put a round through the shotgun itself. Destroyed the weapon and the lieutenant's trigger hand in one shot. The shotgun clattered. The lieutenant screamed. The other 3 Vipers dropped weapons immediately. Surrender. FBI vehicles came screaming through the gates. Tactical teams in body armor. Not just local police, federal agents who'd been building a case against the Vipers for months. Agent Morrison approached Dominic. "Mr. Valentino, interesting evening." "Just defending my family on private property, Agent Morrison." "So I see." Morrison looked at the zip-tied Vipers. "You know anything about anonymous tips we've been receiving about Viper activity? If someone's been helping law enforcement, seems like public service." Morrison's smile was thin. "You run a tight ship, Valentino." After the FBI left with the 4 Vipers after statements were given, Dominic found Callum on the apartment steps. "That was either brave or stupid," Dominic said, sitting beside him. "Stepping out like that. I couldn't let anyone get hurt because of me. That's not how this works. We don't trade family." Dominic's hand found Callum's shoulder. "But I understand why you did it. That's who you are." He paused, seemed to struggle with words. "When my wife died, I thought I'd never have a son. Just me and Adriana against the world. Then you showed up." "I'm not—" "You're my son." Dominic's voice was rough. "Maybe not by blood, but by choice, by action, by honor. That makes it real." Callum felt 16 years of held-back tears break free. Dominic pulled him into an awkward hug. Neither practiced at this, but genuine. "Let me be your dad," Dominic whispered. "Let me give you what my father never gave me. Someone who shows up. Someone who's proud. Someone who'd burn the world to keep you safe." "Okay," Callum managed. "Okay, Dad." 1 year later, October, senior year. Callum Sterling was 17, 3 weeks from 18. He lived above the clubhouse with Maggie, who'd become grandmother to every kid who came through. She was healthier than she'd been in decades. He was dadding Adriana officially. They navigated the awkwardness, established boundaries, fallen into rhythm. School was good. Callum wore his vest sometimes. No one messed with him. Garrett had become neutral. They nodded in hallways, coexisted without conflict. Straight A's, valedictorian track, college applications submitted to state universities within driving distance. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. State University. Thick envelope. Full scholarship, business program, stipend for living expenses, donor anonymous. I got in, he told Adriana at Danny's diner, rebuilt after the shooting. She screamed, launched herself at him, kissed him. I got in too, same school. That evening, Dominic called a church meeting. Full membership. But this time, Callum was invited inside. Not to the gallery, to the table. Hawk stood. Callum Sterling, for a year you've been part of this family. Proven loyalty, honor, commitment. Dominic rose. 1 year ago, my daughter almost died. A kid none of us knew threw himself on bullets. Since then, Callum's proven himself, but he's also 17, college-bound, got his whole life ahead. So I'm not proposing we patch him in now. That's his decision when ready. What I am proposing, Dominic continued, is we offer Callum a prospect position when he turns 18. No pressure, no timeline, just an open door. Hawk called for a vote. Every hand rose. Unanimous. Motion passes. Callum Sterling, when you're ready, the Phantom Kings will be ready. After Dominic pulled Callum aside, you don't have to decide now. You've got time, college, career, whatever you want. What if I want this? Callum asked. What if I want to prospect? Dominic studied him. Then you'd follow a hard path, sacrifice, loyalty above all, living by a code most don't understand. But it also means family, brotherhood, belonging. Callum looked around, at Ox teaching prospects, at Wraith arguing bikes, at Adriana laughing with the old ladies, at Maggie drinking tea with Catherine, at home. I'll think about it, Callum said, but I'm pretty sure I know my answer. Dominic smiled. Take your time, we're not going anywhere. His arm around Callum's shoulders. You're already my son. Patch just makes it official. June, graduation. Riverside High's ceremony was in the football stadium's sunset, painting everything gold. Callum walked across the stage, accepted his diploma, valedictorian. Maggie wept. Adriana cheered. And in the back rows, 20 Phantom Kings in full cuts stood and applauded. His speech was short, about being invisible, about learning to survive, about the moment everything changed. We spend so much time trying to be seen, Callum said. But I learned something. Being seen isn't what matters. What matters is seeing others. Seeing when someone needs help. Seeing danger. Seeing people who matter and choosing to stand beside them not because it benefits you, but because it's right. He saw Dominic, tears on his cheeks. I used to be invisible. Now I'm here. Not because I wanted attention, but because I found people worth being visible for. After Dominic handed him a package, inside was a prospect cut, black leather with prospect rockered patch area, empty waiting. For when you're ready, Dominic said. No rush. Callum held it, this representation of belonging. Thank you for everything, for being my dad. You saved yourself, son. I just gave you a place to land. 1 week later, Danny's diner, center booth, Callum and Adriana. Joe brought food without asking. On the house, kids. Callum looked around. The window had been replaced, but he could still see where bullets came through. Could still feel the impact. Could still remember Adriana beneath him alive because he'd moved. What are you thinking? She asked. Just that a year ago I was invisible. Now you're unforgettable. Not because I wanted to be seen, but because you found people worth standing beside. Outside, motorcycles rumbled. Inside, the jukebox played. And somewhere above, Maggie made dinner for a family she'd never expected. Callum Sterling had spent 16 years learning to survive. Now he was learning to live. 2 years later, Callum was 20, sophomore at State University, business major focusing on security management. 4.0 GPA while working part-time at Valentino Security. He and Adriana were still together, navigating college while maintaining club ties. She studied computer science, already talking about modernizing club businesses. Maggie was 72 and healthier than she'd been in decades. She'd become the clubhouse grandmother. On a Saturday in October, Callum received Dominic's text. Clubhouse, tonight, important. When he arrived, the entire club was assembled, full church, but this time he was invited inside. To the table, Hawk stood. Callum Sterling, for 2 years you've been family. Proven loyalty, honor, commitment. Dominic rose. We offered you prospect position 2 years ago. You said you needed time to grow up, figure out who you were. He paused. You ready now, son? Callum stood, looked around at faces he had come to love. Ox, Wraith, Viper, Hawk, and Dominic. Dad, the man who'd given him everything when he'd had nothing. I'm ready, Callum said. Then let's vote. All in favor of accepting Callum Sterling as prospect. Every hand rose, unanimous. Welcome to the family prospect, Hawk said. Dominic pulled him into a hug. Proud of you, son. That night in the tattoo room, Dominic sat beside Callum as the artist prepared. This is going to hurt, Dominic warned. I've been shot. I can handle a tattoo. Dominic laughed. Fair point. The needle buzzed to life. The artist worked on Callum's shoulder blade right over the bullet scar. The club's logo taking shape, skull with crown and flame wings. Adriana held his hand. Maggie watched from the doorway, rosary in hand, tears, but smiling. You know what happens now, Dominic asked. Now comes the hard part. Earning that patch. Proving yourself daily. Learning the code. I know. It won't be easy. Nothing worth having ever is. 3 hours later, the tattoo was done. Callum looked in the mirror. The Phantom King's logo over his scar. Wound transformed to badge. Dominic stood beside him. Your mother would be proud, Maggie said. Scared, but proud. Callum turned to his family. Blood and chosen, wounds and loyalty. I used to think survival was enough, he said, just making it to tomorrow. But I learned something better. What's that, son? Dominic asked. Living is about who you live for, and I found my people, my family, my home. He looked at the prospect cut on the wall. This is just the beginning, he said. Outside, motorcycles rumbled. The Phantom Kings rolling out for a night ride. And for the first time, Callum would ride with them. Not as a victim, not as a lucky kid, as family, as a brother, as someone who belonged. Callum pulled on his prospect cut, climbed onto the Harley Sportster Dominic had helped him buy, and rode into the October night. The engine roared, the wind was cold, the future was uncertain, but he was home, and that was everything. 3 years later, the Phantom Kings clubhouse was packed for the ceremony. Every brother present, every old lady, every prospect who'd come before and after. Catherine had decorated with strings of lights that made the warehouse look almost magical. Callum Sterling, aged 23, stood before Hawk with his prospect cut draped over his arm. 3 years of proving himself, 3 years of learning the code, running errands, taking shit from full patches, earning respect inch by inch. Beside him, Adriana held Maggie's hand. Both women had tears in their eyes. Brothers, Hawk announced, his voice carrying across the silent room. We vote tonight on whether prospect Callum Sterling has earned his patch. The vote was unanimous. As it should be, Dominic stepped forward with the full patch, the three-piece back patch every king earned. Skull with crown and flame wings. Top rocker, Phantom Kings. Bottom rocker, California. You ready, son? Dominic's voice was thick. I'm ready, Dad. As Dominic affixed the patch to Callum's new cut, the clubhouse erupted. Cheers, applause. Ox's bear hug nearly cracked ribs. Wraith's rare grin. Even Viper cracked a smile. Adriana kissed him, not caring who saw. Congratulations, full patch. Maggie crossed herself, rosary in hand, smiling through tears. Your mother would be so proud, scared but proud. Joe Moretti had come to close Danny's for the night. Kid who used to eat $2 fries in my diner, he said, shaking his head. Look at you now. Callum looked around at his family. Blood and chosen. The invisible boy who'd thrown himself on bullets was gone. In his place stood a phantom king. Speech, someone called. Callum cleared his throat. 7 years ago, I was nobody. Invisible. Alone. Then I saw a girl in danger and I moved without thinking. He found Adriana in the crowd. That decision brought me here. Brought me all of you. He touched the fresh patch on his back. I used to think being seen meant you mattered. But I learned something better. What matters is who you see, who you stand for, who you'd take a bullet for. Dominic put his arm around Callum's shoulders. Welcome home, brother. And Callum Sterling, full patch member of the Phantom Kings MC, realized he'd been home for 7 years. This was just the moment it became official. Outside engines roared to life. His brothers waiting to take their newest member on his first ride as a full patch. Callum pulled on his three-piece cut, feeling the weight of the full patch on his back heavier than the prospect rocker, heavier with responsibility and honor and brotherhood. He climbed onto his bike. Adriana climbed on behind him, arms wrapped tight around his waist. Ready, Dominic called. Ready, Callum replied. And they rode. Not away from something, but toward everything that mattered. Toward the future Callum had earned. Toward the family he'd bled for. Toward the home he'd found in the most unlikely place. The invisible boy was gone forever. In his place rode a man who understood that being seen meant nothing compared to seeing what mattered, standing for it and never backing down. Callum Sterling had learned the hard way that survival wasn't enough, that living meant choosing your family, your brothers, your code. And as he rode through the night with the Phantom King surrounding him, leather cut bearing the patch he'd spent 7 years earning, he knew with absolute certainty he was exactly where he was meant to be.